Thank you, everybody, for joining today's resolution writing workshop. My name is Matt Black. I'm the Director of Government Relations here at the Michigan Academy of Family Physicians, and we are joined by Dr. Jessica Haselschwert. She is the Chair of the Advocacy Committee. So the goal for today is to just go over resolutions, what they are, how to write them, what happens in the resolution process, and make sure that you feel more comfortable in writing your own resolutions. We'll have time for questions at the end, but feel free to type in questions anytime in the chat or the question panel box, and we will get to those as we see fit. So I will have Dr. Haselschwert take it away from here.
All right, well, yeah, thank you for joining us today as we learn more about writing resolutions. I guess some background as far as how I got into this was I was asked to basically join the NCCL conference as a representative a few years ago. And that's how I learned to write resolutions. I didn't really know anything about it ahead of time. And since then, I kind of have become more involved in advocacy, and I thought that it would be nice to help other folks learn how to write resolutions so that they can bring them specifically to our statewide annual meeting in the summer. So you're gonna run the slides for us?
Yep, I will advance those.
Perfect. So basically, so what is a resolution? So a resolution is pretty much just your idea turned into a written formal proposal or recommendation that follows a very specific format that we'll be talking about today. And the resolutions are how you get your professional organization to do something. So specifically for us, we're mostly talking about the Michigan Academy of Family Physicians, and then thereby the American Academy of Family Physicians. But you may also be involved in like the ACOFP or other groups that also have resolutions that are pertinent to those groups as well. For us, the MAFP resolutions are going to be presented and voted upon at the annual meeting, which is going to be Monday, August 14th this year. It's always at our conference, which of course the date on that varies year by year, but this year it's on August 14th.
And one thing to add here, those resolutions that are written by Michigan members during the Michigan conference that are adopted and have national implications for AFP, those will then go to Congress of Delegates there. So they have to be adopted at the state level before they can advance to the national level.
The parts of a resolution, so it starts with the title, and that's a concise description of the topic. And then it lists the authors who is submitting the resolution. And then there are what we call the whereas clauses. And these are sentences that identify the need for change and provide some background data. And those clauses are going to go away after we vote on the resolution. So it's more just the background to let us know why this thing is important that you are going to have us vote on. And then the resolved clauses are really the most important thing. Those state the action that you are requesting and that we are voting upon. So just as an example, I'm not going to read everything here word for word, and you can find plenty of examples on the MAFP and AAFP website. But here you see we've got whereas, and then there's several clauses that provide background information. So it might give some context to your resolution. You might be providing some background data along with your, you might cite your sources there. And you can also refer back to Academy, values, Academy policies, and objectives that are already in place, because you might be talking about how your resolution ties in with those things that we already know that the MAFP or the AAFP values. So all those background clauses, and then finally we've got resolved, and then there is your sentence of what you are asking the MAFP or your other group to do. This particular example only has one resolved clause, but there may be more than one if they are closely linked. So if you're thinking about writing a resolution or resolutions, think about whether it's just one action or more than one related action. If you have multiple actions and they're not super related, you might have separate resolutions, but if they're very closely tied together, you can put them together in the same resolution.
And one thing that I find easiest is to almost start with your resolved clause. Figure out the problem that you want to fix and the fix for it, and then work your way backwards to fill in the data and the statistics that support the solution that you're looking for. And like Dr. Haysley said, this will get into a little bit of technicalities, but as resolutions may have multiple resolve clauses, they can be split up in actions later at the annual meeting, or they can be considered together. So the closer that they are related, the better. The further that they get from each other, there may be requests to consider these resolve clauses separately from each other. And we'll jump into a little bit more of that later.
So yeah, so the first step is really to come up with your idea. So what would you like to see the MAFP do, or what would you like to see us support? And when you're thinking of your idea, think about where that resolution is going to end up, because if adopted, your resolution could establish policy, it could implement a program, it could address an area of concern in some way, or it could really just spur larger scale advocacy efforts. And when you're coming up with your idea, you can also, it's very more than okay to collaborate with other people who have similar ideas. You can have more than one author to your resolution, and that might help you with coming up with your plan and your actions as you are working together. And then once you've come up with your idea, you want to analyze it and figure out if you are wording it in the best way, and if this is an idea that really is something that you think the Academy would need. So the first question is this resolution necessary, or is there already policy to address this? So I've linked here the MAFP policy compendium, which you do have to log into. So if you're a student who's attending this meeting and you don't have a login yet for MAFP, you can also just send your idea to Matt or to myself, and we can let you know if that's already a policy. For the AAFP, I don't believe that you have to log in order to see their policy compendium. So start there, look it up, see what the policy already is. If there's a policy that's contrary to your idea, then that's also okay. We can change our policy. We can update or expand upon our policy, but if it's pretty much like word for word what we already have, then it's probably not the greatest resolution to bring, because we'll probably end up just reaffirming it as policy. So it won't really be necessary. You also want to think about how many people this is going to affect. It doesn't have to be something that's pertinent to every single family medicine doctor. Like if this is something that is specific to, for example, like rural practitioners, that's okay. It doesn't have to be completely applicable to everyone, but if it's like only going to affect maybe third-year residents at Beaumont Hospital or something like that, then it's not a wide enough audience to where it's going to be something that the MAFP wants to necessarily take on. You should also consider if there's a cost associated with it, and resolutions that have a cost associated are not off the table, but ones that have a significant cost are going to be harder to get passed because we do have a limited budget at the MAFP, so we can't necessarily pass a resolution that's going to exceed our budget and that sort of thing.
And with the cost, there's different aspects to this. One thing that we ask as the Academy is, if you understand some of the costs associated with that, please include that in the email and extra notes in something as the process of writing the resolution. If you don't understand all the costs that would be associated, that's okay too. But if you know some of the associated costs, that does help us. Some of the extra costs is staff time, things like that. I understand you probably won't understand those types of costs, and that's something that we can fill in later. But those that you do know up front, it's very helpful to have at least some information on what you expect that dollar figure to be.
And then finally, is this within the scope of the MAFP or whatever group you're writing a resolution for? So resolutions can only direct the MAFP to do something. We can't tell any other groups. We can't tell your hospital system. We can't tell Joe Biden to do anything. We can only tell the MAFP to do things, or we can tell the AAFP to do things by having our resolution direct the MAFP to take the issue to the AAFP for consideration, as Matt mentioned earlier. So some examples here. I've written some examples that are not the best for a few different reasons and then replaced them with some better examples. So the first one, so if you want insurance companies to do away with prior authorizations, well, we can't direct insurance companies to do anything, but we can direct the MAFP to do things. So if you want to click forward, it should replace it. So we might change our idea then to say we want the MAFP to work with other groups like the Michigan State Medical Society to advocate for reduction of physician administrative burden. And that's something that we can and actually did do. And we got the prior authorization reform bill passed. So that's a way that you can have the same outcome, but kind of coming at it from a slightly different angle. So another example might be we want laboratories to abolish the practice of race-based GFRs. Well, we can't tell the laboratories or the hospital systems to do that, but instead our idea might be something like we want the MAFP to establish a public stance against the use of race-based medicine, including race-based GFRs. So that could be something that we adopt as policy, and that is very within our purview. We also, as I said, we can't like have a crazy budgetary lift. And so, for example, of a not so great resolution might be, we want the MAFP to provide startup funds for doctors opening DPC, direct primary care practices. That would be something probably not within the budget of the MAFP. However, we could replace that with a resolution that says we want the MAFP to develop a toolkit to help FM docs start a DPC practice. That's something that probably would have some cost associated with it, some staff time, maybe some IT stuff to go on the website, but that's probably something within the MAFP budget. And then the final one that I have on here, it seems like it would be a really good resolution. So we want the MAFP to oppose laws that would permit concealed carry of firearms in hospitals. That's great, but it's already a policy. So that's why I put that as a not great example. So instead, if we look at our examples related, but not the same, is if we want the MAFP to support red flag laws. We don't have that as an existing policy. So that might be a good example of a policy that you could write a resolution for. So you've got your idea, you've analyzed it, you've made sure that this is something the MAFP can reasonably do. You've made sure it's not already a pre-existing policy. So now we're going to write our resolved clauses. So if you've got more than one desired action, the MAFP supports appropriate funding for a single source vaccine purchasing program for all vaccines. That's very specific and says exactly what we want MAFP to do. We wouldn't want to say just resolve that the MAFP supports the above described program, because if we've referenced our whereas clauses, those, as you recall, are going to go away. So we can't have our resolve just reference the whereas clauses without kind of restating what it said, because it's going to go away. We won't know what you're talking about once those are gone. We also don't want it to be super specific to a certain time or situation, because particularly the ones that are policy related, they go in our policy compendium and they will stay there essentially indefinitely. At some point, we'll probably look them over again and make sure that they're relevant, but we generally don't do that for several years. And so we don't want something that's specific to like this year or this specific Senate bill or something.
We have a 10-year review process for all of our resolutions.
So like an example would be, we could say resolved that the MAFP opposes any legislation that would allow health providers other than MDs and DOs to use the title physician. But we wouldn't want to say like resolved that the MAFP opposes SB 1234. Because we won't know what that is in the future.
And don't let perfect get in the way of you writing a resolution. We have an intake process for the resolutions, and once I intake those, I frequently come back to the author and make sure that we make any adjustments that are needed along the way to ensure that the resolved clauses especially are written in the way that they're directing MAFP action, or that they they spell everything out. In this example, we probably wouldn't even say MAFP. I would type out Michigan Academy of Family Physicians, as we do use proper everything all across the board in the resolved clauses, because again, they stand alone from the resolution and are removed from the whereas clauses once they're considered. So you want everything to be able to stand on its own merits, not have many acronyms, but again, we have the process, so please keep sending your ideas in and we'll work together to get them across the finish line.
So as Matt said, we go backwards. We start with our resolved clauses and then we back it up with our whereas clause material. So once we know what our specific asks are, we ask ourselves, what background do our voters need to know in order to have the adequate information to vote on this resolution? And that's where your whereas clauses come in. So we want to limit our whereas clauses to just the minimum necessary to provide reasonable support for our resolved clauses, though no more than 10, but even 10 is probably pushing it. We're not trying to write a doctoral thesis here. We're not getting this published in a peer-reviewed journal. So it's really just the minimum necessary for what your audience needs. And keep in mind, your audience is other family medicine doctors, so you don't have to get way basic with everything. You can assume a baseline level of knowledge about most of the topics that you're talking about. You want to provide accurate and fact-checked data, and you can provide your citations too. That can be helpful in case somebody does want to go in and look more information up if they're not super familiar with the topic. And we can reference existing policy or existing academy priorities, as I mentioned before. We do want to avoid any editorializing or emotional language, because although some of these can become pretty emotional for us, we can feel really passionately about them, but we want to make sure that we're just sticking to very bare bones, professional, objective language in our clauses. And then last step is to title your resolution. You look back at everything you've done so far and figure out what the best, most concise title is that should be just very descriptive. The purpose of the resolution should be really clear from the title. We don't have to make it creative or cute or anything like that. Again, it's not like something we're getting published. It's just a description of what the reader is about to come across.
And quite frequently on the title, I work with our communications director to make sure that the titles and really a lot of the language within the resolved clauses, as well as the whereas clauses, sorry, are within our style guide. We do want consistency in language across the board of our policies. So while you may submit a title, there may be a point where I will come back to you and ask if we can retitle it just to make sure it fits in our style guide.
And then last up is to submit your resolution. So I have linked the website here. You can also I think pretty easily find it on the MAFB website, but you want to make sure you do that by our deadline, which is June 21st, because we need to have time to look over the resolutions and make all of these suggested edits and things that we were talking about prior to the annual meeting. So make sure you do submit it by this deadline.
And if you don't want to walk through the form filling out process of the website and you have it typed up in a Word document, email it to me, mblack@mafp.com. It's all over our website. I think everywhere in the resolution process, you'll find my email. You know, I've had resolutions for this upcoming meeting come in, both completed resolutions sent to me on a Word document through email and through our website submission form. So there's no wrong way to get it to me.
So what happens next? You submit your resolution, it goes off, we take a look at it, make sure that it meets all of those sort of criteria or guidelines to make it a good resolution. And then it is going to go to the annual meeting. So at the annual meeting, if you haven't been before, basically we all come together in one big room and we follow Robert's Rules of Orders, which is fun. And the resolution is read, testimony is provided, and then it's voted upon. So it's really, really helpful for your resolution if you are there You don't have to be, though. You can always send a resolution, even if you're not going to the annual meeting. If possible, I think it's really helpful to delegate someone who will be there to speak in favor of your resolution, because from what I've seen in the past, the resolutions that don't have anyone there to represent it are not necessarily always as likely to get passed, because there may be resolutions where not everyone agrees with every part of it or with the wording, and we kind of work together with the author of the resolution at the time to make some changes. We can, hear some testimony on it and go back and forth, and it's more likely to get passed if we have that dialogue, as opposed to if no one's there to support your resolution, then we might be lacking some context and that sort of thing. And you're not there to like put your passionate voice behind it. So again, you don't have to be there, but it's good to have an advocate.
And again, if you don't feel comfortable reaching out to somebody, or you don't have a peer that you work with that can be the advocate for your resolution, email me again. Let me know. Send me your comments that you feel would be useful to be read in, and I will find a board member or an appropriate person, possibly the speaker of the meeting, to read the content in so your resolution can be supported. We want to make sure everybody's voice is heard. So we understand that there are barriers to attend the conference, to attend the meeting, in order to state your position on this. So we work every way possible to overcome these barriers. So please don't let anything like that get in the way of you writing the resolution.
Yeah, and anyone can give testimony on the resolution, either for or against. So typically, it depends on the resolution and how controversial it is, of course, but you may have several people kind of speaking on either side of it. So we'll have the people who want to provide testimony basically just come up to the microphone, state their name and whether they're for or against, and then give some background as to why. And this is the part where you can get kind of more passionate about it and use some more of that emotional language and not so objective language. Tell your stories about how this has affected you, and that sort of thing. And this is also where we can make changes, like I said, to the resolution. We can make some adjustments to the wording, to the focus, to help it kind of move through. And so then if, once we've heard adequate testimony, so either everyone has sort of said their piece, or we've noticed that the testimony is starting to maybe get a little bit redundant or very one-sided, we might cut it off at a certain point, and then we take a vote. So if it passes, then some other kind of action will be taken depending on the resolution. So possible actions. So number one, the policy might be enacted or reaffirmed. So basically that goes into the policy compendium. And so why is that important? It's important because then that guides our future actions. So for example, for the advocacy committee, if a piece of legislation comes up and we want to, let's say, put out a statement, make a public comment on a Senate or House bill, maybe testify for committee in the Senate or the House, if we've already got a policy on file, then we already know the MAFP's response. We don't have to go back to the board, go back to the committee, vote on it. We were like, oh, this meets our policy. We've already got this, that this is what the MAFP supports. We can just go ahead and put our weight behind this. So it's very helpful to already sort of have thought about these things ahead of time so that we don't have to delay trying to figure out what our position is later. So that's one possible action. And again, if you have submitted something that is already policy or it's close to already policy, then the action might just be we reaffirm it. Another possible action is it might be sent to the board or to a specific committee for review or analysis. So for example, if there's something that we think may have a cost associated with it, but we don't quite know what that cost might be, we might refer that to another group within MAFP to kind of help figure out what the cost is. Or if we've got a question about what the ramifications of this might be, we might want to talk to the board about it. So we might just need some more analysis on the resolution before we can definitively say that it's something we're going to take action on. We may say, yeah, it's time to take action on this, and then it may go to the appropriate committee to take action. So for example, if your resolution was that we're going to have education on a specific topic at the conference every year, and that's ready for action, we might just forward that to the committee that is in charge of putting together the content for the conferences. If it's an advocacy action, it might go to the advocacy committee and so on. And then, as we mentioned before, if there's resolutions that are meant to affect the AAFP, then those will be taken to the AAFP Congress of Delegates to kind of go through this exact same process there.
And with that last point of the resolutions that affect AAFP, it is frequent that the resolution will have two resolve clauses that are very, very similar in wording. One says MAFP does this, and the second one says AFP does this. It might be MAFP advocate for legislation that would reduce administrative burden, and then it'll say AFP advocate to Congress for legislation that reduces administrative burden. So those resolve clauses might be exactly the same, except one of them says MAFP and the other says AFP. And the reason that they're split into two separate resolve clauses is because those are two separate actions by two different entities. So we always want to make sure that they can stand alone, and each action by each entity has its own resolve clause.
All right, so I think that's all I've got as far as slides go. So if there's anything else that you wanted to add or talk about, or any questions that we've gotten that we can address.
No questions at this point, and I think that did cover everything that I have. So if there are questions that come along, again, reach out to myself, reach out to Dr. Haselschwert, and we will definitely respond to, help you cover the resolutions, make sure that we can get them in on time. Even if it's bare bones, please send it along. And once I have it in, we can start working on it. Our policy in our bylaws state that all resolutions have to be presented to members 30 days prior to the annual meeting. So once I have them in, I do build myself a little bit of time, like Dr. Haselschwert mentioned earlier, of working with the author to ensure that we can get that resolution finalized and present it to all membership in that 30 days as dictated by our bylaws. So again, if it's a bare bones idea, please just send it along and we will work together to get it finalized for you.
Yeah, if you feel like you have a little bit of an idea, but you really are totally lost and don't have enough to even email in, that's even totally fine. I am fully willing to work on resolutions with you. Like I said, it can be a very collaborative process. You can have multiple authors, so work with other people you know, but shoot me an email. I'm more than happy to jump on a phone call or a Zoom meeting and hammer something out together.
And we have multiple members that are willing to do this, that have a lot of experience. So we can kind of cross the spectrum in topics and cover most everything.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you all for joining today. Thank you, Dr. Haselschwert, for taking your time after work today to help present on this important topic. And we look forward to the resolutions that you send in.
All right, thank you.